Hello everyone, welcome back to GGN. This is part 3 for this news report today. There's going to be 4 parts for Friday, September 6, 2013. That's my little introduction spiel. My website is ggnonline.net, Global Government News. I'm just noticed here, this is the latest game I guess they're going to play with my website. There are always little games I like to play with GGN, and I'm sure anybody else that starts talking about certain issues like I do here will get jacked with, so it's just part of the game. Study says beginning of the longest period of economic decline in American history. Economists will often argue that booms and busts are cyclical. Every depression or recession we've ever experienced in America has usually within just a few years been followed by booming periods of growth. But it says, but as the best and brightest of the financial world like to say, past performance isn't a guarantee of future results. According to a demographic study from Cornell, says here that the recovery that many Americans believe is taking hold right now may not actually be happening. In fact, it could be taking another 30 years or more. Well, of course, by then, you're going to have the population drastically reduced, and of course, most of the homogenous cultures will be destroyed, in particular white Europeans. But that's racist to say that and selfish because we're all humans. But keep in mind that the study takes into account only the demographic factors over the next several decades and does not include additional government taxation, currency devaluation, and overall global economic supply and demand factors. I always find it funny how they say that, oh, it's normal, booms and busts are cyclical. Because what they're talking about is just massive robbing. It's always robbing. Is Chota Boy 66? I'm sure he'll come in there and break it down for you, the comment board, as far as how the banks rob people. But it's just those periods of booms and busts are basically when banks and those that control banks rob more and more than they usually do. I mean, money, as far as it, say, oh, money disappeared, or the economies were feeling the economy's wrath. I mean, there was a lot of wealth that was made, over that whole housing crisis or housing bubble, mortgage crisis. It's a lot of people felt pains, and that's all they ever remember. But there's a small group of people that made a shitload of wealth. Many households faced hardships after recession, says a report. More than a fifth of American households faced continued hardships in the aftermath of what they call, again, the recession. I call it the great the great wealth consolidation operation of 2008. But if they call it a recession, then it sounds like it's natural, like it's a natural thing, right? Such hardships, that's temporary. Such hardships included being unable to cover their rent or mortgage, leaving bills unpaid, losing phone service, skipping needed visits to the doctor, or coming up short on food for their families, among other financial struggles. It says such hardships remained more widespread in 2011 and 2005. American households that were unable to cover, says here, essential expenses rose. Also, those suffering food shortages increased from 2% to 3%. The report found that although a vast majority of Americans think they will get help from friends, family, community agencies, when they stumble into economic trouble, it says here that a much smaller share of households in financial straits actually got such help. For instance, only 5% got help from friends, 17% from family, and 10% from elsewhere. I manage that would be government, or selling things, pawning things, garage sales. You see a lot of that in the last couple of years. Kind of interesting here, it says, to gauge how Americans are living, they examine how many households had electronic appliances and electronics. Despite the financial crunch, technology continued to become more common in American households. So see, there you go. That's part of the empire. That's part of this basically engineer society that we have. These little gadgets will always be available. And of course, it's being made on the backs of mostly slave labor or sweatshop labor, being pumped out by huge manufacturers, corporations, basically duopolies and monopolies. And the reason for this is so that the slaves can be tracked more easily, and they can monitor their behavior in that. More Americans quit looking for work. Disappointing jobs report in the U.S. shows a large drop in the share of Americans who either are working or looking for work. The jobless rate was 7.3% in August. That's not really true. It's probably about 20%, the real unemployment, down slightly from 7.4. So that's how they like to skew the numbers, right? It's a misconception, but that small improvement was mostly the result of discouraged job seekers who had given up looking for work. People who are not actively looking for employment are not considered as unemployed. Also, people who are no longer collecting unemployment benefits are no longer considered to be unemployed. And also, Obamacare should be called part-time work care. Remember what I said? All these people that are not firing, but they're cutting down the hours part-time, and they're hiring people for part-time. So people are going to have 2 to 3 jobs. So the jobs that are coming up are low-wage part-time jobs. We'll also give it a kind of the illusion that unemployment is going down. Record 90.5 million people out of labor force, as 500,000 drop out in 1 month. The labor force participation rate plunges to 1978 levels. So we're talking about what, about 93,000, I think that's what they're saying. And going back to what, 92, 95, they were looking at about 87, and it kind of was about the same. Peaked in January 2003, January 2007, January 2010, and then on January 2012. Here's a labor force participation rate, 63% in January 1978, and it climbed all the way up to about November 1990, where it took a dip, started to go all the way back up to about 99, 2000, then again took a dip and kept falling. A quick spike in 2005, 2006, but then it has been dropping steadily to November 2012, back down to almost 64%. Payrolls in the United States rise less than forecasts, says jobless 7.3%. So this is how they like to title it, right? Like in the other video we're talking about, the rebels' brutalities are posing a dilemma, instead of just saying that the Western-backed terrorists executed 5 more people, killed them, murdered them, execution-style prisoners. They like to water down these headlines instead of saying what they are. Like I said, recession sounds temporary, right? Payrolls in the U.S. rise less. They rose less than forecasted. So you just see, payrolls rise. You just kind of like subliminal stuff here. And of course, they throw in that stupid 7.3 jobless number. So it's just complete crap, really. More UK workers earning less than living wage. Research shows the number of workers in the UK earning below the so-called living wage has risen to 4.8 million. Labour said too many people were poorly paid, but ministers said cut taxes on low incomes were helping many people's standard of living. For most of the working population, real wages have been flat or declining for many years, and as a result, more and more people have dipped below the level of the living wage. Cost of holding standard funeral in Britain soars by 80% in 9 years. The cost of holding a standard funeral in Britain has increased by 7.1% since last year, putting a greater strain on Britons whose deceased loved ones should be buried. They said the annual cost of dying found an 80% increase in basic funeral services over 9 years. So a standard funeral averages £7,600 nationwide. That's what I find interesting, how from the moment you're born there's contracts, there's a certificate of birth. You have to be certified and documented, even when you die. When you're born, it's got to cost all this money. When you die, it's got to cost all this money. And of course, when you're alive, well, shit, man, that's just nothing but costing money after money. I mean, they really do use us as batteries like in the Matrix, dude. It's a great analogy. They just suck all the energy and life out of us. I'm talking about the powers that be. Mostly Jewish-run Jews, basically, because they're the ones that run usury, and they're the ones that are all about the contracts. A little interesting side note, though, as far as funerals and burial goes, it makes me wonder, I never heard this before until recently, about how actually burying, burying, I'm not going to bash you if you bury or that's what you plan on doing or stuff, but I always just want to be buried like in a wooden box, instead of like this fancy thing. But then recently I'm thinking maybe cremation's the way to go. Maybe the natives and some indigenous people had the right idea, which is when you put yourself in a box and you bury yourself in the ground, you're almost like you're trapping your soul, your spirit. to this place. Whereas if you you burn your body, it's kind of a form of a rebirth, allowing your soul to go free. And that seems like something that our masters would do to us. Again, like another trick, even after you're dead. I actually wonder if there are mechanisms, or if they're trying to work on mechanisms to trap people's souls in this hellhole. Why, a medieval peasant got more vacation time than you, so. It says here, life for a medieval peasant was certainly no picnic. His life was shadowed by a fear of famine, disease, and bursts of warfare. So his diet and personal hygiene left much to be desired. But despite his reputation as a miserable wretch, you might envy him one thing: his vacations. Plowing and harvesting were backbreaking toil, but the peasant enjoyed anywhere from 8 weeks to half the year off. So, it says the church, mindful of how to keep a population from rebelling, enforced frequent mandatory holidays. It says here that during periods of high wages in the 14th century England, for instance, peasants might put in no more than 150 days a year. As for the modern American worker, after a year on the job, she gets an average of 8 vacation days annually. This is so funny. It wasn't supposed to turn out that way. What, turning people into freaking robots? Exactly. That was the whole damn point. And when they can replace people with machines, they'll do that. John Maynard Keynes, the god of economics, right? So, yeah, see, this is when they were pushing that word technocracy. He predicted by 2030, advanced societies would be wealthy enough that leisure time rather than work would characterize national lifetimes. So far, the forecast is not looking good. I find it kind of interesting how they make it seem like it's so bad to be a peasant, because warfare was what? Warfare is done by the state, and you had no choice. Famines, a lot of time famines, you say bad hygiene and then not enough vaccinations and healthcare. I think a lot of it was due to either malnutrition, because the state was stealing all of the bread and the food that the people were harvesting. Of course, they collectivize and collectivize all of the agriculture and stuff, so people couldn't have farms and live freely. This was the example. Or this is a system of complete control over people. And when they're forced into cities like that, a lot of times that's where disease was really rampant, where people were living unnaturally, really close to each other. It says here, you go back 200 to 400 years and you find that most people didn't even work very long hours at all. It says, in addition to relaxing during long holidays, the medieval peasant took his sweet time eating meals in the day, often including time for an afternoon snooze. Says the tempo of life was slow, even leisurely. The pace of work relaxed. Our ancestors may not have been rich, but they had an abundance of leisure. So in other words, they weren't stressed out. And that's how it is, at least to a certain extent in Europe, like places like Spain, where they have siestas and stuff. And, America, for some reason, they take pride in the fact that they're good slaves. I mean, I don't understand this. They're willing to work harder and harder for less, wave their American flag made in China, and, be smart enough to run the machines, but like George Carlin said, just dumb enough to not realize they're getting screwed up the behind. They call that the American worker, and this is what they would like to have, just like in China, the sweatshop workers who are trying to live like what? Like Westerners, like Americans. You gotta love this. SWAT team takes on native-born terrorist in Florida exercise. So, it says they portrayed native-born Americans carrying out a terrorist attack on the Port Everglades, part of the drill was based around sovereign citizens attempting to steal a shipment of ammunition traveling through the facility by seizing hostages and planting bombs as part of their wider agenda to overthrow the government. You might want to grab a trash can in case you got a puke here. These weren't foreign-born American-hating terrorists. These were native-born American-hating terrorists, and they were making things difficult for the good guys. I mentioned before, the sovereign citizens assault Port Everglades, so this is the actual story. Of course, the sheriffs are supposed to be the good guys, the Constitution defenders, right? The irony is that sovereigns don't call themselves citizens. And also, they don't do things like this. They don't attack things and go on the attack. That's only these douchebags. They attack and they encroach on these sovereigns' territory and property, and then, of course, they have to defend themselves. Of course, they say that's assaulting. Type in this title, and you'll find it. Militarized police storm train looking for a bag of paper while terrorizing passengers. So there you go. will return in part 4, and it'll be 5 parts. Thank you.